Our next case is also out of Illinois. And Andy, this is the case in which you're trying to prove that the man charged with killing 3 women is actually innocent. Your client, Chester Weger, who is now 82 years old, worked at the lodge where the 3 women were staying. The 3 were killed while hiking. He was convicted of 1 murder, but he did not stand trial for the other 2. So, what is it, now that he's been paroled, that you think that you can change in this case that is so old?
Well, I always in these post-conviction cases I get involved with, I always start with the forensics. I'm never going to prove somebody's innocence with a he said, she said. I always look at the forensics, and this is 1960. There were no forensics back then. It was very little, and so what I always wanted to do was to see if there was physical evidence still around that we could test. Good news is there was. We got access to it. We inspected it. There was a ton of evidence in incredible condition. We isolated about 8 specific pieces of evidence, mostly hairs found on the victims. And we got court approval to test those. And in fact, I'm going out to the sheriff's office tomorrow. We're going to package up that evidence, ship it out to a lab in Virginia, and hopefully get the results back early next year.
What do you think that the evidence will show you?
Well, I'm hoping that there is DNA that we can get from these hairs. Some of the hairs look like they have roots. We could do mitochondrial DNA testing. There were other suspects who we know of. You can also input, this DNA into databases. You can put it into family trees. There's all kinds of advanced ways now we can try to connect the dots. I already know from 1960, a hair that was found on one of the victims was sent to Washington University in St. Louis to be analyzed. And a report was generated that said it was dissimilar to Chester Weger's hair. They didn't produce that to him at the time because, you know why? In 1960, the Supreme Court had not decided Brady versus Maryland, which came out in 1963, which says the state has to share any potential exculpatory evidence with the accused. Think about this.
Wow.
Think about being arrested at a time when the state doesn't have to tell you about evidence that could potentially exonerate you. I've got the report now. It's a written report. If Chester Weger would have, and the fact that the state tested that hair, sent it out, the FBI sent it to the Washington University Medical School, shows you they thought it was significant evidence. They were hoping it came back linked to Chester Weger. It came back and it wasn't, So there's a bunch of other hair evidence that we're going to test. There's cigarette butts, there's some twine. I always think the forensics is the way you have to go because the forensics is science. It's not advocacy. I could make a lot of good arguments right now on why I think he's innocent based on non-forensic evidence. But forensic evidence is always the starting point.
So this happened in March of 1960, correct? I want to make sure for those of us, who are not familiar with this case. It was
1960. I wasn't even born yet.
Oh my God.
And what's so ironic is to say to Chester Weger when he gets arrested, "Don't worry, Mr. Weger. There's a little boy who's going to be born in 2 years. And when he gets to be an attorney, and he's already been an attorney for 30 years, then he'll take up your case and maybe we can try to prove your innocence. So just sit tight for the next 60 years and we'll try to, be patient."
It's incredible. And he went up for parole how many times? More than 20, almost 30?
Yeah, I think he was successful on the 24th time. And what caught my eye about the case, as a little backstory, I was representing another gentleman who was up for parole the same day, a guy named Cleve Heidelberg, who I actually got out of prison after 47 years. And what struck me at the time was both guys had their parole denied, but just like my client, Cleve Heidelberg, Chester Weger had maintained his innocence for half a century. When you're up for parole, your first step, if you want to get out, is to always express remorse and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. It's been 50 years. It's been 40 years, And Chester Weger never did that. Cleve Heidelberg never did that. So I was like, wow, I wonder, this guy just sounds like Cleve Heidelberg's twin brother. I wonder if there's more to the story. So I wrote him a letter. I went down to see him. And lo and behold, 4 years later, here I am today on the verge of shipping out evidence to be tested.
Wow, you chose him. He didn't choose you. That's so
Yeah,
fascinating.
and the other thing was the next day in the paper, so my client was denied parole. There was a big article about Chester Weger and the Starved Rock murders. I'd never heard of it. It was 1960. But what struck me also was it was a confession-only case. There was no physical evidence linking Mr. Weger to the scene. And what was also powerful to me was there was an interview with the one remaining juror who was alive, 92-year-old Nancy Porter. And she said in this article that she regretted her guilty verdict. She thought his confession, and I'll use air quotes, was implausible. And then when I put all this together, I thought, you know what? I love these stories where it may not be what you think it is.
Mhm.
And the red flag to me was him maintaining his innocence for half a century. And it was so much like my client, Cleve Heidelberg, who was in the same boat, who refused to say he had any guilt, refused to express remorse. And so it was my curiosity and wanting to hear more about him that led me to contact him. And if I would have done that and started digging and it didn't go anywhere, I would have just, gone my separate way. But the more I dug, the more red flags, the more I was like, oh my gosh, there's more stuff here.
So these were dubbed the Starved Rock murders because it
Yes.
happened at a state park, which is about 90 miles southwest of Chicago, just to give everyone an idea of what we're talking about. And so it was March 14th of 1960. Three women decided, who were staying at the Starved Rock Lodge, decided to go on a hike. They had lunch, they went on their hike, and then 2 days later, their bodies were found in a cave. The victims are 50-year-old Lillian Otting, is that correct? Oding, Frances Murphy, 47, and Mildred Lindquist, 50. So the Chicago Tribune at the time reported that they were bound, partially nude, bludgeoned to death, each having injuries consistent, suffering with something like 100 blows each. And authorities believed that the killer or killers caused the catastrophic head injuries by swinging a frozen tree limb that was found nearby and stained with blood. And 21-year-old Chester Weger was a dishwasher at the lodge that they were staying at. He was married. He had 2 children. How did he ever become a suspect?
That's a good question. I think what happened is eventually, so the murders, like you said, happened in March. Chester Weger's not arrested until November. Okay. This was the kind of O.J. Simpson case of the day back then in 1960. For those who are, older, there was a magazine called Life magazine back then. It came out weekly. It was a national publication. Life magazine covered the Starved Rock murders. It was a national news story. This was a case that the state wanted solved, the police wanted solved, everybody wanted solved. And basically, even though Chester Weger had passed several polygraphs in the first month and a half, they learned there was a claim that he had a prior rape when he was younger, which he disputes. I think that put him on, as a more of a person of interest. And then even though he had passed multiple polygraphs, they felt the need to take him to Chicago to give him another polygraph. And on the way, it's admitted they threatened him with the death penalty. We now know in false confessions, one of the leading causes is threats of death. And then he comes back to, the Starved Rock area. They continue to hound him, surveil him, threaten him, and he ultimately confesses. I mean, I think they had to find a fall guy. He's 21 years old, uneducated, works at the lodge, and it was just a horrible, horrible situation that they wanted to put this case to bed.
So where is he now? He's finally been paroled.
He's finally paroled. He's living, in downstate Illinois. He's 82. It's just he's free, but his life has been taken from him. I mean, he's 60 years in prison. I mean, he's 82 years old. So the case had so many red flags to me, and that's why I continued to spend the time working on the case, because I really believed in Chester and his innocence. And the more I dug, the more I found.
And the documentary that will be airing on HBO is about Chester's case?
The documentary is about the Starved Rock murders. Yes, so it's about Chester's case.
Wow.
It's going to be 3 one-hour episodes. They're going to show the first 2 episodes December 14th on HBO, and then on December 15th they'll show the third. And I'm actually hoping that there'll be an episode sometime next year, which would be the 4th and final episode, that I'm hoping has a happy ending. I've got my fingers crossed. But they're going to tell the story of the Starved Rock murders and how it was this big case back in the day that most people haven't heard of. Told a lot of it from the viewpoint of there was a man named Anthony Raccuglia who was the prosecutor back in the day. His son, David, always was kind of fascinated by the case, and himself was thinking about making a documentary movie, filmed a bunch of footage over the years. And it's kind of about now the son of the prosecutor on this journey for the truth.
Oh, I love it.
It's a really interesting story. And, like I said, I spent so much time on it. It's been a big part of me, in the time I spent the last several years.
I bet. Well, please come back and tell us how this story ends.
I would love to. I hope to come back, and I hope I'm telling you a happy ending. And, I'm hoping a lot of times with DNA testing, you may not get results. You may not get definitive results. There's a lot of different ways this could go. I'm hoping for a resolution. I'm hoping for the truth. I always tell people I've helped several people get out of prison. I've had a lot of people reach out to me who want me to help them. I always tell people I call them like I see them, and I have also represented police officers for years. So I've seen the other side of it. I've seen people claim wrongful convictions that weren't wrongfully convicted. Some people are, some people aren't. And like I said, I call them like I see them. I try to look at the forensic first and foremost, because the forensics is science. And if I believe you're innocent, you will have no bigger advocate than me.